Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is. Welcome to Left Side of the Aisle. I'm your host, your renter, your raconteur, your rapscallion, your whatever other R you care to use right there. My name is Larry Erickson, and for the next almost half hour, I'm going to be sort of rambling away about things that I think are worthy of your eyes and ears. So hang in there with me, and we'll get right to it. If you have any reactions to the show, be sure to send me an email. That's the best way to do it. In fact, send it to my personal email, which is whoviating, WHOVIATING at AOL.com. Or you can go to my website, which is called Lotus Surviving a Dark Time. The URL will be over here somewhere a couple times during the show. You can get the email address from there, or you can leave a comment there if you'd like. As always, the one thing I request, if you send me email, to please leave something in the subject line to make it clear this is not spam, this is about the show, and be a little patient about getting an answer because I stink at answering email. So, now we will get on with this. And we're going to start, as I always like to whenever I can, with some good news. And we actually have some good news this week on what has become, unfortunately, a rather unexpected front for good news: reproductive rights. The state of Washington has rules that say that an individual pharmacist can refuse to fill a prescription for religious reasons so long as another pharmacist working at the same pharmacy provides timely delivery on that prescription. The rules also say that the pharmacy itself, that is the business as a whole, cannot refuse to fill a prescription even if the owner objects. Now, a suit on this arose involving a pharmacy known as Ralph's Thriftway. It was involved with the pharmacy's refusal to fill a prescription for a morning after pill, an area where timely delivery of the prescribed medication is obviously an issue. The case resulted here in the state trial court, finding that the state's rules were an unconstitutional burden on First Amendment rights, meaning that by throwing these rules out, not only could individual pharmacists, but the entire corporation could, without any consequences to itself, refuse to fill any lawfully issued prescription that it didn't feel like filling. The good news? The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has just overturned that decision, finding that the state's rules are in fact constitutional. They do not, the court found, impose any kind of undue burden on religious beliefs, but they do rationally further the state's interest in providing for patient safety and, again, timely delivery of legally prescribed medications. Now, this is unlikely to be the end of this matter because the corporation that owns Ralph's says it's likely going to appeal, but at the very least it stands now as a strong statement about a woman's right to contraception. You know, people are sometimes still surprised to hear that you can, in most places in this country, you can walk into a pharmacy with a prescription and you can be told, "I won't fill that because I object to birth control." But the fact is, people should not be surprised by this. Advocates of contraceptive care have been warning for a long time that the anti-choice crowd, the anti-women's rights crowd, the anti-freedom cabal, that those people were not going to stop at trying to outlaw abortion, but they were going to go after birth control as well. The idea was laughed at, but we see it more and more coming true now. And in fact, I was telling people about this possibility literally 11 years ago. Which, I have to say, makes the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling even sweeter. It's like a big, fat, not so fast to those who would turn the clock back an entire century to a time when Margaret Sanger was being arrested just for telling people about contraception. Now, speaking of birth control, we actually have good news on a related front. A few weeks ago, I told you that the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that a Catholic order of nuns called the Little Sisters of the Poor, which runs about 30 nursing homes around the country, must comply with the Affordable Care Act. Now, that law, also known as Obamacare, as I'm sure you know, it requires most employers, other than houses of worship, to cover the full range of contraception in their employee health plans at no out-of-pocket cost to the women. However, an exemption was written into the law allowing religiously based nonprofits to opt out of providing control for coverage for any birth control if it's against their beliefs. All they have to do is file a form with the federal government saying so. They don't have to prove their belief. There's not a conscientious objection where you have to prove you really believe this. You just have to say it. In those cases, the government then directs the third-party insurer to provide the contraception coverage. Well, the Little Sisters objected even having to file the form as some great intrusion on their religious freedom. The result of that would be that not only would they not provide contraceptive coverage, they would be actively interfering with the ability of their employees to obtain contraceptive coverage by preventing that third-party coverage from kicking in. So they sued on that. Happily, they lost. Now, the good news here is that the Second Circuit Court, that was the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals has just overturned a 2013 district court decision that had exempted 4 Catholic Church-affiliated nonprofits from having to file that form. These nonprofits together employ 25,000 people at 2 high schools, 6 hospitals, 3 nursing homes, and several nonprofits. Just like in the case of the Little Sisters, the court found it necessary to state the obvious. Quoting the court, "Through a modicum of paperwork, an eligible organization throws the entire administrative and financial burden of providing contraceptive coverage on its insurer or third-party administrator, and," quoting the court, "we cannot conclude that the simple act of completing the notification form imposes a substantial burden on plaintiff's religious exercise." Remember again with this form, you don't have to prove you believe this, you just have to say you do. Now, this is now the 6th, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals is now the 6th appeals court to have turned away attempts by church-affiliated organizations to not have to file the form, which again would have that inevitable impact on their employees' own right to act in accordance with their own consciences. 4 of those 6 cases have been appealed to the Supreme Court, but clearly the trend of legal judgment is against them. And frankly, I say that's good news. 2 quick footnotes to this, by the way. Wheaton College is an evangelical college in Illinois, and it lost in the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals on its attempt to deny access to birth control by being exempted from having to file this form. Wheaton College has now declared that because it didn't get its way, it's going to take its ball and go home. Wheaton College has canceled all health insurance that it had offered to its students, which clearly is the most possible Christian response to this. Meanwhile, by the way, the other footnote is that a new NBC Wall Street Journal poll on favorability rating has an interesting surprise in it. A favorability poll is where people are asked about a whole list of people and organizations and whatnot. Do you have a favorable or an unfavorable view of them? You know, generally it's very favorable, favorable, unfavorable, very unfavorable, and then they add those up. What's your favorable rating, what's your unfavorable rating, and they subtract the one from the other to get a net favorability rating. So if your favorability rating is, I'm picking numbers out of my head, 35, and your unfavorable rating is 65, you have a net unfavorable rating of 35. Or if you're favored by 90% and opposed by 5, you have a net favorability rating of 85. Okay? Got that? Okay. Planned Parenthood of America has a higher net favorability rating than any Republican presidential candidate. In fact, it had a net plus 15 favorability rating, which is higher than any candidate of either party. It's higher than either party. It's higher than Obama. It's higher than Chief Justice John Roberts. It's higher than the Supreme Court itself. And it's higher than the NRA. It was the highest of them all. So that, too, I think is a very interesting footnote. We do have some more good news, though. This, again, is on an area which we have talked about before. In fact, we've talked about it a lot, same-sex marriage. Once the Supreme Court ruled that same-sex couples should have the right to get married on the same basis that opposite-sex couples do, a rational person would be forgiven for thinking, well, okay, that's settled, let's move on to the next question. But of course we can't do that because the reactionary homophobic bigots continue to look for ways to block or at a minimum hinder the ability of same-sex couples to actually exercise that right to get married. County clerks have simply refused to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples. Judges and other civil officers have simply refused to marry same-sex couples. Well, good news, rack one up for the good folks. A judge in Toledo, Ohio, had asked for an accommodation to refuse to marry same-sex couples because of his claimed deeply held religious beliefs. Well, on August 10th, the Board of Professional Conduct of the Ohio State Supreme Court issued an advisory opinion saying that, quote, a judge should be mindful of the requirement to perform administrative duties without bias or prejudice, despite the judge's personal, moral, and religious beliefs. And if a judge did perform opposite-sex marriages while refusing to perform same-sex marriages, that judge, quote, acts contrary to the judicial oath. In other words, the court said to judges, saying that you have a responsibility, even more than other people, you have a responsibility to act in accordance with the law as it is, not as you wish it would be. The only way around this, the court said, would be for a judge to refuse to perform any marriages at all. But it added that if you did that in order to avoid having to do same-sex marriages, that, quote, may be interpreted as an improper bias or prejudice against a particular class and, quote, raise reasonable questions about his or her, that is, the judge, his or her impartiality in proceedings where sexual orientation is an issue. Now, this was an advisory opinion. It was advice, and it was a judgment. It was not a binding decision by the Supreme Court. It was an advisory opinion by the Board of Ethics. But still, the meaning is clear. When you put on that robe, you have to leave your personal bigotry aside, whatever it is. And if you can't do that, you shouldn't be a judge. One last bit of good news for this week. According to the World Health Organization, a vaccine against Ebola has proved to be 100% effective during trials conducted in Guinea and might be highly effective in protecting people against the virus. It could be, the WHO said, a game changer. It's a single-dose vaccine called VSV-EBOV, those letters. It combined a fragment of the Ebola virus with another safer virus in order to train the human immune system to resist the Ebola virus. And apparently, it works. Trials began in March in Guinea, one of 3 West African nations hit by the Ebola virus, by the outbreak, the others being Liberia and Sierra Leone. Over 4,000 people who had just recently been exposed to Ebola were vaccinated. After 10 days, not one of them was sick. This is a result called remarkable by medical experts, not only for the effectiveness of the result, but the fact that this entire process of developing the vaccine took less than 1 year. So we may, and for the moment we have to emphasize the word may, but we may have beaten Ebola. And wouldn't that be good news? And as a quick footnote, this is also a measure of what government and, yes, corporations, the vaccine was developed by Merck, it's an indication of what government and corporations can accomplish when they actually want to. Now for a segment of our occasional series, our once in a while series. It's called The Little Thing. This is where something in a news article gets me. It's something that is not getting attention or is not being commented on. It's some little thing that sort of slips by without people really commenting on it. Now, you may have heard about the case involved here. It did generate a certain amount of buzz. An East Texas judge named Randall Rogers heard a young guy named Justin Bundy admit in his court to assaulting the ex-boyfriend of his significant other, one Elizabeth Janes. He said he did this after the ex-boyfriend said disrespectful things about Janes. Rogers sentenced Bundy for 15 days for assault, sentenced him to 15 days in prison, unless he accepted probation with some very unusual conditions. Bundy was prepared to accept the 15 days in jail until the judge told him he wouldn't have the chance to call his work to tell him what was happening. That's not how this works, the judge says. Apparently, figuring they were just going to bundle him off without an opportunity to tell anybody what happened to him, and fearing that would mean the loss of his job, Bundy accepted the probation. And this is where it gets weird. The conditions included getting counseling, writing Bible verses, and marrying Janes within 30 days. This is after having asked Bundy at the sentencing hearing if Janes was worth it. Now, a number of people have commented on how these conditions were so far beyond the judge's lawful authority as to boggle the imagination. In fact, Jane's father said that when he tried to get some legal assistance for the pair, that the lawyers laughed at him because they could not believe this was a real case. There have been calls for Judge Rogers to be kicked off the bench and even disbarred. And all that is true, and all that's to the good. But here's the thing, the little thing that you'll only find if you dig deep into the comments on this case. Judge Randall Rogers required that Justin Bundy marry Elizabeth Janes within 30 days. Right. Doesn't Elizabeth Janes have anything to say about this? I mean, doesn't she have any say in when or how or under what conditions or even who she marries? Apparently not in the mind of Judge Rogers. He can just say, oh, you marry her, and apparently she has nothing to say about it. She's just a commodity for exchange. So not only is Judge Randall Rogers a constitutional ignoramus with a grossly inflated sense of his own power and importance, and it seems a Bible-thumping fundamentalist, he's also a raging sexist who would have to jump forward a few centuries in order to get as far as the 20th. Disbarment is too good for him. All right, finally, before we go to break, something we have here occasionally. It's for somebody who just does the right thing on a matter big or small. We call it the Hero Award. I've several times on the show brought up news of the movement sometimes known as Fight for 15. That is, fight for a $15 minimum wage. This movement has mostly involved fast food and other service workers, leading some voices to dismiss the call on grounds along the lines of something like, hey, I'm a licensed electrician, I only make $13 an hour. Those burger flippers think they deserve more than me? Screw that. So we bring to the discussion the voice of Jens Rushing, an EMT in Arlington, Texas, reacting to the fact that the state of New York plans to raise the minimum wage for employees in fast food chain restaurants to $15 an hour over the next few years. He said, and I'm quoting, "I'm a paramedic. My job requires a broad set of skills, interpersonal, medical, and technical skills, as well as the crucial skill of performing under pressure. I often make decisions on my own, in seconds, under chaotic circumstances that impact people's health and lives. I make $15 an hour. And those burger flippers think they deserve as much as me? Good for them." Look, he went on, if any job is going to take up somebody's life, it deserves a living wage. If you have a job and you have to hire somebody to do it, they deserve a living wage. And why do people like gripe about those burger flippers? He said, why are you angry about fast food workers making another $2 an hour when your CEO makes 400 times what you do? Directing your anger at other workers who, like you, are just trying to get by, he said, is exactly what the bosses want. And I'm so glad to see that the word bosses is returning to our vocabulary. He said, the bosses, they want us fighting over who has more crumbs while they take off with, he said, almost the whole cake. Okay, so this wasn't some grand gesture on his part. It wasn't something that echoed from the hilltops. It was a Facebook post. But it was absolutely the right thing to say at the right time. The right thing to do. And doing the right thing, especially when there's no particular gain in it for you, that's what, for us around here, that's what can make you a hero. Jen's rushing. You are a hero. And we are taking a break. And we're back. And we're back with one of our regular features. It's the Clown Award, given as always for some act of meritorious stupidity. This week, the big red nose goes to the Bic Pen Corporation for what can only be described as a truly epic fail. The company put out an ad in South Africa supposedly intended to celebrate Women's Day there. This was the ad. Now, in case you can't make it out, the text reads, look like a girl, act like a lady, think like a man, work like a boss, hashtag Happy Women's Day. Yeah. Forgetting the advice when you're in a hole, stop digging, the company responded 2 days later by taking down an ad with a post with the classic non-apology of saying it apologizes to all our fans who were offended, not that we did something offensive, but we're sorry you took offense, and saying that the text was meant in the most empowering way possible. The company then tried again, taking down that post and replacing it with one saying, we're incredibly sorry for offending everybody. Okay, at least it's an actual apology. And thanking people for their feedback, which will, quote, help us ensure that something like this will never happen again. Which would be a lot more convincing if it hadn't happened before, back in 2012, when the company brought out Bic for Her, pens in pink and purple, designed to fit a woman's hand. The Bic Pen Company didn't get it then, probably doesn't get it now. Bic. What a bunch of clowns. From there to our other regular feature, this is the Outrage of the Week. And this is sort of not a particular event that has just happened. This is sort of like an overall sense of outrage, just something that I've come across that just kind of got to me. I've undoubtedly made it clear by now that I am not impressed with our mainstream media. It is overall lazy, too focused on trivialities and personalities rather than substance, more concerned with entertainment than informing, overly enamored of the technology of how the news is delivered rather than the content of the news, and is so committed to a false notion of balance that it equates neutrality with never reaching a conclusion, and is so devoted to the audience-generating usefulness of conflict that it claims controversy where none exists. Think of example of evolution and global climate change. The result is that it leaves us as a people uninformed, malinformed, and misinformed. One aspect of that is that we are an incredibly parochial people, uninformed about and largely uninterested in the world around us, except as it directly affects us, often enough leaving us gazing at the world with dull eyes empty of understanding. Let me give you a sense of what I mean. I'm going to give you some headlines. Now, just headlines, except for I may throw in a bit just to give a little context. But as I go through this list, and this list was compiled in a single day, a few days ago, in a single day from a single source, I want you to ask yourself how many of these things you had ever even heard about, and of those you have heard about, how much you know about any of them beyond just the headline. Okay, here's the list. Car bomb kills 7 in eastern Libya. You do know there's been a civil war in Libya ever since we kicked out Muammar Gaddafi, right? Temperatures soar in deadly Egypt heat wave. Heat waves hit some European countries, more wildfires reported. 3 security men injured in Heliopolis bomb explosion. Heliopolis is a suburb of Cairo. Germany gets tough on Balkan immigration. Turkish security forces reel from wave of attacks. U.S. consulate targeted amid Turkey attacks. Greece closes in on third bailout deal. Remember I talked about the Greece thing a few weeks ago. 7 injured in a suicide blast near Kabul airport. You do remember there's still a war in Afghanistan, right? More than 1.3 million acres of paddy fields in Burma destroyed by floods, which also means 1.3 million acres of food source. Burkina Faso calls for aid as floods set to worsen. Burkina Faso is a country in West Africa. Iraqi Prime Minister rolls out sweeping reforms. You do remember Iraq, right? El Salvador is now the world's most dangerous country outside of a war zone. Militants again firing from multiple rocket launchers at Ukrainian army positions. Seoul blames North Korea for mine blast, vows response. Apparently there's some bombs planted in some mines in South Korea near the border. There have been gun battles between police and rebels in Kashmir, which is a province on the Pakistani-Iranian-Indian border, claimed by both and has been the cause of at least 2 wars. Yemen's loyalist forces push Houthi rebels from Aden. Remember there's a civil war in Yemen, the one we're involved in, we've been making drone strikes in? Haiti voted in elections marked by disorder and delays, elections that had been stalled for 4 years. And 21 people have died and 185,000 were forced from their homes from a typhoon that hit China this week after it had pelted Taiwan with 40 inches of rain in 2 days, leaving 3 dead, 185 injured, and 750,000 without electricity. How much of that did you know? And the fact that you probably didn't know much about any of it is truly an outrage. It's not an indictment of you. It's an indictment of our media. Finally, here's another example of the failure of our media. Perhaps an almost ideal one, because this one does affect us directly, and we still don't hear about it. I have talked on occasion about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, this huge 12-nation trade deal described as the biggest in history, being negotiated in secret. The news on this front is that the announcement about a final deal has been put off because the 12 partners still can't agree on a final text. There are still sticking points, and they ended their most recent round of talks in Hawaii only saying that they're committed to making an agreement without actually setting a date for the next round of negotiations. Obama on this is starting to feel some time pressure. He wants a deal to go in effect before he leaves office, but he has to allow for months of text scrubbing, language translations, all these kind of details that are inevitable before Congress would ever vote on it. And Congress might not be happy about voting on a deal like this if it gets into the 2016 election season. But here's the thing you probably do not know about. The TPP is only one of 3 massive trade deals now being negotiated all in secret. The others are the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, the TTIP, which is largely between the United States and the European Union and seeks to do for the Atlantic side of the world what the Trans-Pacific Partnership wants to do for the Pacific side. And the Trade and Services Agreement, which involves more than 50 countries and looks to establish the same sort of transnational corporation-dominated free trade in services that the other ones look to create in goods. And about the only way we know about what's going on with any of these is because of WikiLeaks, which gets the stuff from whistleblowers and publishes them to the almost complete indifference of the U.S. media. I'll be talking more about the TTIP and the TISA next week, but for now we're out of time. You have the best week you possibly can. We will see you next week. For now, peace.